My name is Natalie Brennan. I am 29 years old. 2 years ago, a wildfire took everything from me, including my husband. The firefighters told me he never made it out. For 22 months, I carried that truth like a stone inside my chest. Then one evening, my mother-in-law called me, and her voice sounded like someone who had just seen a ghost. "Natalie," she said, "I need you to come over right now. I found something." And when I saw what she was holding, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe to HeartPath Stories, and drop your city or country in the comments below. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. 2 years ago, my husband was a wildland firefighter in Northern California. His name was Marcus Joel Brennan. He was 32 years old, 6'1", with dark brown eyes and a laugh that could fill an entire room. He had been fighting wildfires for almost 8 years. He knew the terrain. He knew the danger. And every single time he left for a deployment, he always said the same thing to me before walking out the door. He would cup my face in both hands, look straight into my eyes, and say, "I always find my way back. Always." That August, a fire broke out in the Sierra Nevada foothills. It was one of the worst the region had seen in decades. Dry winds pushed the flames faster than anyone predicted. Marcus's crew was deployed on the third day. I remember watching the news coverage that evening, sitting cross-legged on our living room floor with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, watching the orange sky on the television screen and thinking, he's out there somewhere in that. He texted me once on the second day of the deployment. Just 4 words, "All good, love you." That was the last message I ever received from him. On the 5th day, a supervisor from his department came to our front door. He was a tall man with a weathered face, and he took his hat off before he spoke. He told me there had been a sudden wind shift overnight. Marcus's crew had been caught off guard. The fire had overtaken their escape route. Most of the crew made it to a safety zone, but 2 members did not. Marcus was one of them. The official report said he had been overrun, that his remains were unrecoverable due to the severity of the burn area. I remember the room going very quiet. I remember the ceiling fan above me spinning slowly. I remember thinking that none of this was real, that in a moment I was going to wake up and Marcus was going to be in the kitchen making eggs like he always did on Sunday mornings. But I didn't wake up. Because it wasn't a dream. The weeks that followed were a blur of casseroles left on the porch, flower arrangements I didn't have the heart to throw away, and phone calls I let go to voicemail. My mother flew in from Ohio and stayed for 3 weeks. My sister drove up from San Diego. Everyone was kind, everyone said the right things. But at night, when the house went quiet and the last car pulled out of the driveway, I would walk into our bedroom and just stand there. His pillow still smelled like him for the first few weeks. I made myself stop smelling it eventually because I knew the day it stopped smelling like him would be the hardest day of all. 22 months is a long time to live inside grief. Long enough to almost convince yourself you have accepted something. Long enough to start going through the motions of rebuilding. I went back to work as a school librarian that following January. I smiled at students. I read picture books to kindergartners on Tuesday afternoons. I ate dinner. I slept. I functioned. But functioning is not the same as living. And deep down, beneath all of that daily routine, something in me never fully let go. I used to tell myself that was just the nature of loving someone the way I loved Marcus. That some people leave a mark so permanent that no amount of time can fully erase it. I never imagined that what I was holding on to might actually be something real. It was a Tuesday evening in early October when my mother-in-law called. Her name is Diane, and she lives about 20 minutes from me in the same town where Marcus grew up. Diane is not a dramatic person. She is steady and practical, the kind of woman who fixes things rather than falls apart over them. When Marcus died, she grieved quietly and deeply, and she channeled most of that grief into taking care of me. So when she called that Tuesday and I heard the sound of her voice, I knew immediately that something was very wrong. She sounded the way she had sounded when she first heard about Marcus, like the ground had shifted beneath her without warning. "Natalie." Her voice was low and unsteady. "I need you to come over right now." I sat up straighter on the couch. Diane? What's happening? Are you okay? I'm fine, she said quickly. I'm physically fine. But you need to come over. I can't explain this on the phone. Please come. You're scaring me, I said. There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breathing. I know, she said. I'm sorry. Just come. Please come now. I grabbed my keys before she even finished the sentence. The drive to her house felt longer than it ever had before. The October air was cool and dry, and the streets were quiet. I kept cycling through every possible explanation. Had she received some news about the department? Had something happened to a family member? Had she found something of Marcus's that she wasn't prepared for? I had no idea. But the sound of her voice had settled into my chest like a cold weight and stayed there the entire drive. When I pulled into her driveway, the porch light was on and she was standing just inside the screen door waiting for me. The moment I got out of the car, she pushed the door open and stepped outside. She was holding her phone in both hands. Come inside, she said quietly. We sat down together at her kitchen table. The overhead light was bright and steady. She set her phone face down on the table between us, and for a moment she just looked at me. I had never seen Diane look uncertain before. But that night, she looked like she didn't quite know how to hand me what she was about to hand me. I was on the phone with my friend Carol earlier, she began. Carol lives in Eastern Oregon now, near the border. She volunteers with a community outreach group up there. Diane paused and pressed her hands flat on the table. She sent me something an hour ago. A photo. She said she saw it on the volunteer group's shared page and something about it made her stop. She couldn't figure out why she kept looking at it, so she sent it to me. Diane reached out and turned the phone over. She opened the photo and slid it slowly across the table toward me. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. It was a candid photograph, slightly blurry, taken outdoors. It showed a group of volunteers gathered near a food distribution tent at what looked like some kind of rural community relief event. In the background, mostly out of focus, was a man. Diane reached over and zoomed in. My heart stopped. The man in the background was tall. Dark brown hair, slightly longer than I remembered. A beard he hadn't had before. He was standing at an angle, not fully facing the camera, but enough. Enough that I could see the jaw. The slope of his shoulders. The way he stood with his weight shifted slightly to the left, which was something Marcus always did because of an old knee injury from college. And on his right forearm, even through the blur of the zoomed image, I could see the edge of a tattoo. A small compass rose. Marcus had gotten that tattoo 2 years before we were married. I couldn't speak. Diane's voice came from far away. I almost didn't see it at first either, she said. But then I kept looking. And I can't, her voice broke slightly. I can't explain it away, Natalie. My hands were shaking when I picked up the phone. I brought the image close to my face as if somehow more proximity would make it clearer. The man in the background was not looking at the camera. His face was partially turned. But everything else, the height, the build, the tattoo, that stance was Marcus. This can't be real, I whispered. I know, Diane said. I know. But look at the tattoo. I see it. That's a compass rose. I know what it is. My voice came out barely above a breath. We sat there in silence for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. Where was this taken? I finally asked. Diane had already done some digging. The photo had been posted to a closed volunteer network page by a woman named Sandra, who ran a small grassroots relief organization operating out of a rural county in eastern Oregon near the Idaho border. The group provided food, clothing, and basic medical care to displaced individuals, many of whom had lost their homes and documentation in various disasters over the past few years. She had not included any names or identifying information about the individuals photographed, citing privacy concerns for the people they served. I sent Carol a message asking her to reach out to Sandra directly, Diane said. But I haven't heard back yet. I was already reaching for my own phone. I found the volunteer organization's Facebook page. It was small, with fewer than 400 followers. I sent a message directly to the page. I explained who I was. I explained about Marcus. I explained what I had seen in the photo. I asked if they could tell me anything about the man in the background of that image. Then we waited. An hour passed. Diane made tea neither of us drank. We sat at that kitchen table and barely spoke. Every few minutes one of us would check a phone. Nothing. Then, just past 10 o'clock, a reply came through on Diane's phone from Carol. Sandra had responded to Carol directly. She said that yes, she recognized the man in the photograph. He had been coming to their distributions for several months. He didn't talk much. He gave a first name, but she wasn't sure it was real. He had significant scarring on the left side of his neck and shoulder consistent with a burn injury. He appeared to be living rough in the area, possibly in a camp along the river near the edge of the county. He was quiet, kept to himself, and sometimes seemed confused or disoriented. When I read the words burn injury and scarring on his left shoulder, the room tilted around me. Marcus had been on the left flank of his crew the night the fire overtook their position. Diane read it at the same time I did. When I looked up at her, her eyes were full of tears. "We have to go," I said. "Yes," she said immediately. "We do." Neither of us slept that night. We were on the road by 5 in the morning. It was a 7-hour drive. Diane insisted on coming, and I would not have had it any other way. We took her car because mine had been making a noise I kept meaning to get checked. We drove through the pale gray dawn with the heater on and a thermos of coffee between us, and neither of us spoke very much. There wasn't much to say. The thoughts were too large for words. I spent most of the drive staring out at the highway. Fields, power lines. Small towns passing like frames in an old film reel. I kept turning the facts over in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to fully assemble. The report had said his remains were unrecoverable. That was not the same as confirmed. I had been told that, and I had accepted it because what else could I do? But unrecoverable was not the same as gone. I had let those two words become the same thing in my mind, and for 22 months I had carried the weight of that equation. What if I had been wrong? What if he had survived, badly burned, disoriented, and wandered away from the fire zone in a direction no one expected? What if he had been found by someone who didn't know who he was, and what if he didn't know who he was either? I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the passenger window and tried to breathe slowly. We arrived in the area just after noon. Carol had arranged for us to meet Sandra at a small diner on the edge of town. Sandra was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a clip. She shook our hands and sat with us in a corner booth and spoke gently and carefully. She told us the man had first appeared at one of their distributions about 14 months ago. He was in rough shape when they first encountered him, malnourished, severely scarred along the left side of his neck, shoulder, and upper back, and clearly struggling with his memory and orientation. She had assumed at first that he might be dealing with a mental health crisis or substance use, but over time, she came to believe that his confusion was neurological. He had difficulty with dates and names, including his own. He was kind. He was always polite. He helped where he could at distributions. But there were large gaps where his past simply wasn't accessible to him. "Does he know his name?" Diane asked. Sandra hesitated. "He goes by Joel," she said. "But I'm not sure if that's something he remembered or something someone else gave him. He introduced himself that way from the beginning." Joel. I felt a small electric current move through me. Marcus Joel Brennan. He went by his middle name when he was a child. His mother had called him Joel until he started school and decided on Marcus. His closest friends from his childhood still called him Joel sometimes. I showed Sandra a photo of Marcus on my phone. His department headshot, which I always kept in my camera roll. She studied it for a long time. Then she looked at me. "The beard is different now," she said. "And he's thinner, but..." She nodded slowly. "Yes, that could be him." She told us he was usually at the river camp, about 3 miles east of town, and that he came into their weekly Thursday distribution reliably. Today was Wednesday. He might be at the camp. She offered to take us. The camp was a small cluster of tents and makeshift shelters in a flat clearing between the river and a stand of cottonwood trees. It was tidy, quieter than I expected. A few people sat near a fire pit. A dog slept in a patch of sun. Sandra spoke briefly to a woman near the edge of the camp, who pointed further along the riverbank. He was sitting on a flat rock near the water, skipping stones. His back was to us. He was wearing a gray thermal shirt and dark work pants and heavy boots. He was taller than most of the other people in the camp. Even from behind, from 30 feet away, I felt something in my body that I could not name. Something animal and certain. Diane made a small sound beside me. She had her hand pressed over her mouth. Sandra hung back and let us walk toward him alone. The stones on the riverbank shifted under my feet. He heard us and turned around. And I saw his face. It was him. The beard was fuller now, and his hair was longer, and the left side of his neck carried a network of pale scar tissue that hadn't been there before. He was thinner than I had ever seen him, and there was something careful and guarded in his expression that I didn't recognize. But his eyes were the same. Dark brown, slightly wide-set, with the small creases at the corners that deepened when he smiled. He was looking at me the way you might look at a stranger who seems slightly familiar, but you can't quite place them. "Hi," he said. His voice was the same. My throat closed completely. I couldn't get a single sound out for a moment. "Hi," I finally managed. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Natalie." I stopped. I swallowed. "I think I might know you." He tilted his head slightly. Something moved across his face that I couldn't read. "People say that sometimes," he said. "I don't remember a lot." "I know," I said quietly. "I think that might be because of what happened to you 2 years ago. In a fire." His jaw tensed. He looked down at the water briefly and then back at me. "I remember fire," he said carefully. "I don't remember much around it." Behind me, I heard Diane exhale shakily. I took one step closer to him. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. "Can I show you something?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he nodded. I opened my phone and found our wedding photo. We were standing outside a small white chapel in the mountains, and Marcus was laughing at something just off camera, and I was looking up at him the way I always did, like he was the funniest and best thing in any room. We were both so young in that photo. We looked so easy with each other. I turned the screen toward him. He stared at it for a long time. Something shifted in his face. Not recognition exactly, not the way I desperately hoped it would look, but something. A kind of reaching, like a word on the tip of your tongue that you can almost hear but can't quite catch. "That's you," he said finally, pointing at the woman in the photo. "Yes," I said. He was quiet. "Who's the man?" I pressed my lips together hard. I was not going to fall apart. Not yet. "His name is Marcus," I said. He was a wildland firefighter. He went into a fire in the Sierra Nevada in August 2 years ago, and his crew thought he didn't make it out. His remains were never recovered. I paused. He has a compass rose tattoo on his right forearm. He went very still. Slowly, he turned his right arm over and looked at the inside of his forearm. The compass rose was there, just the way I remembered it. Slightly faded by sun and time, but unmistakable. He stared at it for a long time. "I always thought this was mine," he said finally. His voice was very quiet. I didn't know where it came from. That was the moment I broke. I had held it together through the 7-hour drive and the diner meeting and the walk along the riverbank and all of it, and I broke on that one sentence. I turned my face away and pressed my hand over my eyes and cried silently, trying not to make a sound, trying to give him space because I knew that crying in front of a man who couldn't remember being my husband was not going to help either of us. Diane was beside me in an instant. Her hand on my back, steady and firm. He said nothing. But he didn't walk away. In the weeks that followed, we worked closely with a neurologist who specialized in trauma-related amnesia. The doctor explained that the kind of memory loss Marcus experienced, called dissociative amnesia complicated by traumatic brain injury, could occur in extreme survival situations. The working theory was that he had survived the fire by following the river downstream, which had carried him miles from the original incident site before someone found him collapsed on a roadside. By the time he was found, he had no identification, severe burns, and no coherent memory of who he was or where he had come from. He had spent months recovering informally with the help of volunteers and community members before eventually making his way to the Eastern Oregon area where Sandra's group operated. Legally and medically, the process of confirming his identity and reconnecting him to his former life was slow. There were DNA tests and documentation and careful conversations with his former department and with the doctors and with his own fragmented, partial sense of himself. He never pressured into anything. He led. I visited every week. Sometimes I brought Diane. I didn't talk about our marriage much at first. I just talked to him. I told him small things. I told him his mother called him Joel when he was little. I told him he loved black coffee and hated decaf with a moral conviction that seemed out of proportion. I told him his favorite drive was Highway 1 the Fall. I told him he once drove 4 hours round trip just to get a specific kind of fish taco he had tried once on a work trip and never stopped thinking about. Sometimes he laughed at those things, a quiet, almost surprised laugh, like he wasn't entirely used to laughing yet. Sometimes he asked questions. What was our house like? What did I do for work? Whether we had wanted kids someday. That question sat with me for days after he asked it. About 3 months into our visits, I brought a box of photographs. Old prints, not digital. His mother had kept albums, and I went through them carefully and chose images that covered his whole life: childhood, adolescence, his early firefighting years, our early time together. I set them out on the picnic table outside Sandra's distribution tent, and I sat across from him while he went through them slowly, one at a time. He spent a long time on a photo of himself as a teenager standing with 2 friends in front of a lake. He touched the edge of the photo carefully. I think I remember this lake, he said quietly. I can almost see it. Lake Almoner, I said. Your mom took that photo. You were 16. He nodded slowly. Something behind his eyes moved. We could go there, I said carefully. If you wanted to. He looked up at me then. He studied my face for a moment in the particular way he had developed, the careful way, the way of someone who was trying to read something written in a language they once knew. You've been very patient with me, he said. You do the same, I said. He looked back at the photograph. We did go to Lake Almanor. It was a cool Saturday in late April, the water still carrying the cold of winter, the pines on the far shore dark and dense. We walked along the edge of the water, and Diane stayed back near the parking area to give us space, and neither of us said very much. I watched him look at the lake. Then he stopped walking. I stopped beside him. He was looking at a specific section of the shoreline where a group of large boulders jutted out over the water. He was very still. We used to jump off those, he said. I looked at the boulders. I didn't know this story. This was before me. You and your friends, I said. Yeah. His voice was different. Quieter, more interior, like he was listening to something just below the surface. Carter. And some other kid. I can't get his name. He pressed 2 fingers against his temple. We used to come here in July. We'd jump off the big one on the right. He paused. Carter broke his wrist one summer trying to do a flip. I stood very still. These were details I had never told him. Details I didn't even know. He was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at me. And this time the look was different from every look that had come before it. It was not guarded. It was not careful. It was something wide open, something almost frightened in how open it was. Natalie, he said. It was the first time he had said my name from his own memory. I felt the air go out of my lungs completely. Marcus, I whispered. He reached over and took my hand. His grip was firm and immediate, the way it always used to be. We stood there at the edge of the water for a long time without speaking. His thumb moved slowly back and forth across my knuckles, and I stared straight ahead at the lake and the boulders and the dark pines on the far shore, and I let myself feel something I had not let myself feel in a very long time. Not hope anymore. Something past hope. Something that had come through hope and out the other side. Relief. The deep, bone-settling kind that only comes after you have carried something very heavy for a very long time and someone finally helps you put it down. He didn't get everything back at once. Memory doesn't work that way. The doctors reminded us regularly, and we were careful with our expectations. But things came back in waves, first impressions and images, and then fuller scenes, and the scenes slowly started connecting to each other, and eventually they connected to us. To our house, to the morning routine and the inside jokes and the way he always left his boots exactly 1 inch too far from the door. He remembered our first date 6 months before he remembered our wedding day. He remembered the name of my childhood dog before he remembered the name of the street I grew up on. Memory has its own logic, its own order, its own stubborn sequence, and we followed it where it led. The day he came home to our house for the first time, I had cleaned every room and put fresh flowers in the kitchen. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since our first date. I stood in the doorway of the living room and watched him move slowly through the space, touching things. The bookshelf, the arm of the sofa, the framed photo on the side table of the two of us at the coast 2 summers ago. He stopped in front of that photo for a long time. Then he turned and looked at me from across the room. And he smiled. It was his real smile, the one that starts slow and then takes over his whole face, the one that used to make every room feel like enough. "Hey," he said. Just that. Hey. The way he had said it 10,000 mornings before. Hey, I said back. There was a long time when I believed that the worst thing that could happen to a person was losing someone they loved. I have learned since then that the worst thing is a little more complicated than that. It is losing someone, and then carrying the weight of that loss until it becomes the whole shape of your life. And then having to learn slowly and carefully and against all the habits grief has built in you how to put the weight down and let yourself be relieved. Marcus always told me he would find his way back. I used to think that was just something people say. Now I know he meant it.